nightmares behind the mascot outfit. The stadium was filled with energy, and the fans cheered excitedly as the game began. Thomas sat next to his father, not particularly interested, but his eyes kept drifting toward the mascots moving around the field. What caught his attention the most was the Miami Dolphins mascot, a towering, massive dolphin with a gray body and deep-set blue eyes. However, his excitement soon turned into unease as he noticed the mascot's strange behavior and unsettling appearance. The mascot stared directly at Thomas, making him feel dizzy and uncomfortable. He told his father, but his father paid no attention. Feeling uneasy, Thomas lied to his father, saying he needed to use the restroom to get away from the unsettling mascot. Distracted by the game, his father absent-mindedly allowed him to go alone. The stadium restroom was empty when he entered. Thomas locked himself inside a stall, sitting down, trying to shake off the strange feeling in his stomach. The tension in the restroom escalated as someone else walked in. Heavy footsteps approached and stopped right outside his stall.
"Hello, kid."
Thomas froze.
"I can hear you breathing."
Then came a strange, unsettling giggle. He covered his mouth, too terrified to respond or even breathe loudly. The man had a deep, warm voice and kept asking if the boy needed help, insisting that he wanted to play with him. The man's words sent chills down Thomas's spine, but he decided to remain silent. After a while, Thomas thought the man had left, so he finally gathered the courage to push the stall door open. But at that moment, he stopped in his tracks. Thomas saw the mascot's head, but this time, it had fallen off. Now, the mascot's head had been replaced with a man's face. A twisted grin stretched across it.
"I'm not a dolphin, kid. You know that,"
the man said. Thomas panicked, tears welling in his eyes. He turned to run away from the man. Before Thomas could react, the man grabbed him and forced him to the ground. His screams echoed through the restroom, but no one could hear them over the roaring noise of the stadium. The man continued grinning as he pinned Thomas to the ground, holding him in a suffocating grip. But then, in a desperate fight for survival, Thomas heard his father's voice from outside the restroom. The man seemed to hesitate for a moment before releasing Thomas and turning toward the door. Thomas screamed, and at that moment, his father burst in, shoving the man aside and landing several strong blows on him. The man in the dolphin suit tried to flee. He didn't get far. Within seconds, he was tackled, handcuffed, and dragged away while screaming. The next day, the police revealed everything. The man in the dolphin suit was not the real mascot. He had been sneaking into stadiums for years, blending in with the mascots to avoid suspicion. He targeted boys who wandered off alone. Unlike Thomas, some of them were never seen again. Authorities had been searching for him for a long time, but he had always slipped through their grasp until now. In his apartment, they found horrifying evidence photos, names and stolen belongings from previous victims. After that day, Thomas's father changed. He paid more attention to him, something Thomas never thought would happen. Sometimes, when passing a stadium, Thomas still glanced at the mascots. How many other children had almost never made it home? He was one of the lucky ones, and he would never forget that. Nightmare ski trip. Lily's first big skiing trip. She and her friend rented a cabin in Snowmass, right next to the Aspen Mountain Ski Resort. It was her first time snowboarding, and although she had faced a few challenges on the slopes, she was eager to explore the area more with her friends. She got separated from Amy when she decided to take a break on the mountain, and a man approached her. He mentioned how he wasn't used to seeing many beautiful girls like her here. What she found strange was that her face was mostly hidden by her ski mask. Lily lied, telling him she was with her boyfriend to make him stop. But something unnerved her when he mentioned having seen her and her friend arrive. Lily didn't think much more about it, pretending she hadn't heard anything. and snowboarded away. It was also when she felt she was snowboarding better than ever. That morning, she returned to the mountain alone to practice. Halfway down, she saw a man from a distance. This time, she hid behind a nearby tree and observed. He was wearing the same jacket and ski boots as the man she met before. But then she noticed something unmistakable, a jagged scar over his eye, which Lily clearly remembered from the way he had looked at her so eerily. That's when she noticed his bag, slung over his shoulder, with a keychain bearing the letter J hanging from it. She felt everything growing strange and ominous, as if by instinct, so she called Amy to leave quickly. When she returned, ready to leave, a snowstorm began outside, trapping them and making it impossible to leave. She grew anxious and scared, locking all the doors. But when night fell, things started to get strange. Later that night, they went to their rooms to sleep. Lily, unable to sleep, stayed up looking at her phone. The house was quiet, but the eerie silence was broken by footsteps on the wooden floor. The sound grew louder, and then she heard something that sent chills down her spine. The doorknob turning. It wasn't her friend, it was someone else. She sat up and called out for Amy. No one answered, and panic started to set in. But she paused, wondering why they were trying to enter her room. She tiptoed to the door, pressed her ear against it, and listened carefully. The footsteps had stopped, and the silence was stifling. Lily quietly unlocked the door and turned the knob, pushing it open as gently as possible. When she cracked the door open, she saw a tall man moving around the house. His shadowy figure loomed in the dim light as he seemed to try to enter their rooms. At first, she couldn't make out his features, but then, under the faint moonlight from the window, she recognized him, the man with the scar over his eye, who had said strange things to her on the mountain. He was also carrying the bag with the J keychain. Terrified, Lily gently shut the door and locked it. She grabbed her phone and quietly called 911, whispering into the phone to avoid being detected. Then, the knocking began deliberate at first, then louder and more forceful. The man was trying to get into her room. She couldn't take it any longer. Lily shouted,
"Get out!"
She yelled, telling the man she had called 911. The banging stopped, and she heard his voice from the other side of the door.
All right, girl.
His footsteps grew fainter as he walked away. Lily and her friend stayed locked in the room, terrified. Only when the police arrived a few minutes later could they confirm the intruder had left. The next day, Lily noticed something that made her heart race. A keychain had been left on the floor near the front door, possibly dropped by the intruder during his attempt to enter her room. Forensic experts collected it as evidence and found fingerprints on it. They analyzed the prints and matched them to a man with a criminal record known for breaking in, stalking, and harassment. Although the police had a lead, they had not yet located the intruder. The case remained open. Back home, Lily couldn't shake the thought that the man was still out there. She didn't know how he had found them, how long he had been following them, or what he might plan next. The woman on the 21st floor. It was a few years ago, and I was a technical customer support representative at a company. The night shift had become my routine, an endless cycle of work, going home, eating, resting, and returning to work. Halloween was just a few days away. Our office was bustling, hurriedly decorating for the holiday. As we worked, we exchanged scary stories. There was a story about a ghost named JJ, a boy who haunted the call center at night, but that wasn't the story that unsettled me. Jen, a senior employee, talked about the lady in white, a ghost that appeared on the 21st floor, which was also the top floor of our building. She said the ghost would appear between 3 o'clock and 3:05 a.m. She'd be wearing a white dress, standing at the far north end of the floor, staring out the window. Jen told us there was a very simple rule. If you see her, you must remain silent and still. Don't make a sound or do anything to attract her attention. At the time, we all considered the story to be just a legend, a way to pass the time. But part of me was curious. I loved horror movies and thought it would be fun to see if the story was actually true. It was a Sunday, and I had signed up for an extra shift while everyone else was off for the weekend. At 2:00 a.m., I remembered the story Jen had told me. I didn't really believe in ghosts or anything like that, but I was intrigued. And in reality, I had been watching horror movies and a lot of mystery and supernatural series on Netflix and YouTube. At 3:00 a.m., I felt pretty hungry, so I took the elevator up to the 18th floor to eat. There was a free coffee bar and vending machines there. I filled up my water bottle and took a drink. I was sitting alone in the kitchen area, eating the snacks I had bought. I felt chilly, but it was probably just the weather getting colder, so I wore my blue hoodie with the hood up. While eating, I thought about going up to the 21st floor alone to check if the story about the lady was true. I was really curious. So, I went up to the 21st floor and sat down on a chair with a computer desk nearby, waiting for the woman. It was cold and quiet, so I pulled my hood up and put on my headphones to listen to music. Suddenly, my phone froze. A crackling sound came through my AirPods, a jarring noise that sent chills down my spine. I slowly looked up. There was a figure of a woman, dressed in white. Her back turned to me as she stared out the window. I froze, remembering that if the story were true, I needed to stay silent. But then my AirPods disconnected, and faint music started playing from my phone. I quickly turned it off. Everything happened so fast that I could barely process what was going on. And then, suddenly, the woman's head began to turn, slowly, revealing her pale face, with 4 eyes, smiling a terrifying grin. Terror washed over me, and I crouched down, crawling under the table and across the floor toward the exit. My hands trembled as I moved, praying she wouldn't notice me, that she would just disappear like in the story. And then I managed to get up and run, making it to the elevator. I frantically pressed the button and waited in fear until the elevator finally opened. There was a long hallway leading to the elevator, and as I stepped in, I saw the woman standing at the end of the hallway, staring directly at me. I hit the close button, but then she started crawling toward me. Slowly at first, then faster and faster. She was almost on me, but just then the elevator doors closed, and I collapsed in relief. The elevator reached the ground floor, and I ran out to the parking lot, jumped into my car, and drove away immediately. As I was driving away, I looked up and saw her smiling at me and waving from the 21st floor. I quit and resigned from my position that very day and never went back. It gave me nightmares for weeks. To this day, I still don't know what happened with that woman, and I wonder what would have happened if she had reached me in the elevator. The eccentric stalker. I never intended to return to that cursed cabin, but fate has a way of pulling you back to places you desperately want to forget. 6 months after that horrifying winter night, I had escaped the isolated cabin by the frozen lake. I thought I had escaped the terror, but the nightmares continued. The image of that man, silently eating the fish I caught and then lying down in my bed as if he owned the place, kept flashing in my mind from time to time. Eventually, the fear subsided, replaced by a desperate need for answers to the questions I had been asking myself. Who was he? Why was he there? And most importantly, what would have happened if I hadn't escaped? This time it was summer, with the snow melted and the lake no longer frozen. I decided to return to the cabin. I convinced myself that daylight would protect me, that the cabin would be less frightening. The journey to the cabin felt as strange as the first time, but now the scenery was lush and green, a stark contrast to the frozen wilderness I remembered. I didn't expect the trip to take so long, and it was already dusk when I arrived, but I had made it. I parked the car and cautiously walked slowly to the front door. The door creaked open, revealing the unchanged interior. A cold fireplace and the bed where that man had slept were still intact. I began searching the cabin, trying to find any sign of the man who had invaded my space months before. The silence here was suffocating, and memories of that haunting night started to flood back. Then I noticed a small leather-bound notebook on the nightstand, peeking out from under the pillow. It hadn't been there before. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The leather was worn and cracked, as if it had been used many times over a long period. I opened it to reveal yellowed pages filled with neat, small handwriting. It was a journal. The entries were dated, beginning several years ago, detailing the life of someone who had once lived here. The early entries spoke of peace and joy while fishing at the quiet lake, much like the way I had once enjoyed it. I could imagine such a beautiful scene, but then it changed. He started writing about sketching a scene of a stranger, a figure that would appear at the edge of the lake near a tree, watching him as he fished alone. This stranger, much like the one I had encountered, wore tattered clothes and seemed to survive on whatever he could find to eat. The final entry was dated the winter after I had rented the cabin. It was hastily written, the words barely legible. "He's inside. I can't leave. He won't let me go. I fear this will be the end." I put the journal down, my mind spinning. Was the man trapped by him? What had happened to him? And was he still alive? I realized I needed to leave, right now. As I turned to leave, the cabin door suddenly slammed shut. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing on the wooden floor. I had no weapon, nothing to defend myself. I began to regret my curiosity. I backed into the corner, the same corner I had hidden in months before. The shadow gradually revealed itself. Who was it? The man from the journal or someone else? I couldn't be sure, but he seemed more sinister. I pressed myself against the wall, knowing I might have no escape. The man stepped closer. He was very near, and then his eyes met mine. I felt like my life was about to end here. I braced myself for the worst, but then he did something unexpected. He reached into his coat and pulled out the journal, handing it to me with a trembling hand. I stared at the book, then back at him. His eyes softened, pleading. It was as if he wanted me to take it. I reached out, my hand shaking, and took the journal from him. As soon as it touched my hand, it was like a hallucination. The man's form began to fade, disappearing, leaving only his eyes, glowing with sorrowful despair, before they too vanished. I didn't know what was happening anymore. I stumbled toward the door with the journal in my hand. As I stepped outside, I glanced back one last time. The cabin was silent, empty, but the feeling of being watched was gone. Then the unease returned. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I drove straight into town, straight to the police station, ready to tell them everything. A week later, the police informed me that the man in the journal was indeed the previous tenant, reported missing months ago. His body has yet to be found. The authorities boarded up the cabin, declaring it unfit for habitation. It was placed in a restricted area. I just hope that, unlike me, no one will return seeking answers. Because you never know, it could be the last day you live. The ghostly tape. In a small dorm room, a typical living space for a college student, cluttered with textbooks and clothes. Each desk lamp serves as the only real source of light. Lai and Khan, two female students, are sitting on an old carpet next to the TV stand, preparing to watch a movie for their weekend break. The TV is old, seemingly from the 90s, still equipped with a VHS player. Beside the TV is an old cardboard box, filled with random tapes and outdated electronics. The box came from a trip they had taken earlier that day to a vintage thrift store. Back at the dorm, they rummaged through the tapes, laughing at the absurdity of their choices: old sitcoms, instructional videos, forgotten movies. Then, they found a plain black VHS tape. It had no markings except for a single word hastily scrawled in faded red ink on the label: "Don't." The label was torn and dirty, as though it had passed through countless hands before. They hesitated for a moment, but curiosity quickly won them over. Lai slid the tape into the VHS player. The TV crackled to life with a sharp, screeching sound. The picture was grainy, distorted, and flickered with a buzzing noise. The first image appeared: a dilapidated house in the middle of a dark, dense forest. The camera shook as if it was being held in someone's hand. There was no sound except the rustling of leaves. The house is old and almost collapsed. As the camera moved closer, the creaking of the front door opening slowly filled the silence. Inside the house, the rooms were empty, covered in dust, old furniture draped with sheets. The air grew heavy, tense. In a long and narrow hallway, at the end was a door, slightly open. Then the screen flashed for a moment. What was happening was quite difficult to understand. The tension of the tape seemed to gradually seep into their space. A few seconds later, the camera was now in the basement, standing before a large circular symbol carved into the floor. Strange runes were etched into the surface. As they stared at it, they felt like they couldn't breathe. Then, a loud crash, and the screen jerked toward the far end of the basement. There, in the darkness, something moved. The two girls froze in place. It was tall, impossibly tall, with limbs that were too long and thin. Its face was hidden in the shadows, but its hollow eyes stared into the room. A faint whisper, barely audible, began to play through the TV speakers. But the sound quickly grew louder, more persistent, almost as if it was speaking directly to them. They seemed to be hypnotized. Lai couldn't take her eyes off the screen. Whispering like a mantra, Lai stood up and began to lose control of her body. Can called her name, but it didn't seem to reach her ears. Lai walked towards the TV, eyes glassy, body stiff. She could feel Khan's eyes on her, but she couldn't stop. The figure on the screen seemed to pull Lai closer, its long, bony fingers stretched out as if wanting to catch her. Khan gasped, backing away. Khan suddenly realized that Lai was moving like a puppet on the TV. Lai continued to move like the figure on the screen, her body twisting unnaturally, her joints cracking. Khan could only scream in desperation. Lai continued to move as shown on the screen, her body contorted in a strange way, her joints cracking. Khan could only scream in vain. Lai's eyes began to roll back and a sick, twisted smile appeared on her face. Lai turned her head and approached Khan with her arms outstretched, her fingers slowly gripping her shoulders as if wanting to harm her. Khan, terrified, tried to reach out with trembling hands to stop the tape, but failed. The image on the screen mirrored every detail of what was happening in the room. Everything felt like something had stepped out of the TV. The long, spindly fingers stretched with gray, skeletal skin. The figure moved slowly toward them, its joints cracking with every step, as if just existing in this world was painful. And then the door burst open. It was Jay, our other roommate. The sudden interruption sent a shockwave through me, breaking the trance. Lai staggered backward, her arms falling to her sides. The figure retreated into the shadows with an ear-piercing screech that only Lai and Khan could hear. Then the figure was gone. We collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath, looking at each other in shock. The only thought in their minds was to get out and never look back. They scrambled to their feet, fleeing the room without a second glance, leaving the cursed tape behind in front of a confused Jay. The noise on the TV was distorted, and the final image showed that shadowy figure coming from the basement. It thought it was screaming like it was sealed again. Maybe it almost succeeded in escaping, and maybe Lai and Khan would be the replacements. Ghosts at the theater. Jane was a beautiful woman. She often filmed famous or mysterious locations with her crew, doing whatever it took to gain fame. Today, Jane was standing in the bathroom of the Birdcage Theater, also known as the Birdcage Theater in Arizona, which was now out of operation. Surrounded by whispers about the past, she looked in the mirror and applied lipstick with excitement welling up inside her. Hundreds of thousands of followers are waiting for her latest video, and she plans to take them on a dramatic journey about the haunted history of this famous theater. It is famous for its cruel history of violence and death. As she leaned closer to the mirror, something blurred at the edge of her vision. An indistinct shape hovered behind her. Startled, she screamed and quickly turned back to look. That surprise was from her boyfriend, Ken. He responded with an amused and teasing attitude. She started complaining about him scaring her. But after the laughter and teasing, she still felt something truly behind her, making her think about the curses that haunted this place. Ken set up the phone, urging her to start recording, and Jane was ready to begin. Through her journeys exploring haunted houses and places, she had built an online persona as someone who delved into the paranormal. Sharing such stories made her following grow continuously. Her sixth sense leads her to supernatural encounters. She begins to tell the dark, mysterious stories behind this Birdcage Theater. She started passing places like bars and old tables that made her feel a dark energy around her. Jane shivered and continued, recounting stories of gunfights and dreams. Broken ended life here. Suddenly, the piano in the corner played a faint, haunting melody. It was only a few notes, but they seemed to echo endlessly. Jane kept her camera steady, moving toward the staircase. As she climbed the stairs, she suddenly felt like she heard the mournful cry of someone, seemingly a woman. She carefully looked around. There was no one else, or any changes. She started to turn to ask Ken, but it seemed like no one heard that except me. Finally, she reached the theater's dressing room. The room was dark, with faded, peeling wallpaper at the corners. Jane felt a sharp, terrible pain in her heart as she stepped inside. She started sitting against the wall, trying to breathe. Ken worriedly told her to stop, but she was stubborn and determined to have footage at this place. Jane begins to recall the tragic gossip story of Margarita, a dancer and aspiring actress. She is in her prime. She was murdered by her own colleague in this very room. She was stabbed through the heart with a high heel by someone envious of her success. It was said that her spirit haunted the room, seeking revenge or even a way to live again. Despite the lingering pain, Jane was intrigued. She was a bit scared, but couldn't ignore Margarita's ghost story. It would complete her video perfectly. She returned to the bathroom to prepare. When she stood in front of the mirror, something was different. Jane leaned closer, squinting into the darkness. That's when she actually saw something. A ghostly figure stood behind me, his face pale and painted, his eyes sunken and dark. She wore an old dress, her expression a distorted mixture of longing and anger. I feel like maybe it's Margarita. She quickly raised her phone to record a video. The pain returned, piercing her chest like a blade, but Jane persisted in capturing her reflection on the glass. After a while, Ken didn't see Jane anywhere. Worried, he went to check near the restroom. The door was wide open, and he saw Jane acting very strangely. He was shocked to see Jane standing in front of the mirror, talking to herself, and he asked if she was okay. She slowly turned to look at Ken from head to toe and said, "Who are you?" Her words sounded strange, foreign. Her eyes widened in confusion. He chuckled awkwardly, thinking I was pulling one of my usual dark jokes. Clearly, there was some truth being overlooked. Ken led that girl out of the theater, unaware that his real girlfriend was trapped in the mirror, freeing a vengeful spirit. Jane was bound to this place with no escape. She screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the darkness. Unheard, she felt the weight of centuries pressing down on her. She was trapped. Perhaps she had been possessed when Jane started filming Margarita. Margarita had stolen Jane's life and identity, and now she was out in the world, free to pursue the fame that had been taken from her long ago. In the days that followed, Jane's social media was filled with increasingly strange and terrifying posts. Her followers loved the change, but no one knew they weren't following Jane, they were following Margarita, who was dead and now replacing Jane. Vengeance of the Soul. It was Saturday night, and Hannah was still at her university library, finishing a project due next week. Her friend had ditched her again, leaving her to finish it all on her own. She checked the clock and saw it was nearly 10 p.m., so she closed her textbooks and returned them to the shelf. Hannah went back to the table and put her books in her bag, and at that moment, she heard a noise. She looked around and thought she saw a man staring at her, but when she blinked, he was gone. Hannah left and headed home. She knew she shouldn't wander alone in a new city. Then she heard footsteps behind her and turned around, seeing a figure in a dark hoodie disappearing into an alleyway. She stopped, feeling a surge of fear. Was someone following her? She hurried on, relieved that her apartment was nearby. Hannah got into her building safely. She stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the 14th floor. Just as the doors were closing, someone reached in to stop them. She held her breath as the doors opened, and a tall, fairly handsome man stepped into the elevator, his dark eyes looking at her with a warm expression. He started a friendly conversation, complimenting her outfit. She blushed, feeling a bit nervous. The elevator stopped on the 13th floor, and he stepped out, looking back at her and saying, "See you around." But as the doors started to close, Hannah saw him reach into his coat and pull out a shiny knife. Realizing the danger, she pulled out her phone as the elevator reached her floor. But just as she dialed the last digit for the police, the doors opened again. She screamed as she saw the man standing at the door, with nowhere left to run. He plunged the knife into her chest, her sweater soaking with blood. Pain spread across her chest as everything faded to black. The next morning, neighbors found Hannah dead in the elevator. Residents raised concerns about safety measures. Security cameras were installed, and more importantly, an emergency stop button was added to the elevator. Months passed, and the elevator killer remained uncaught. He prided himself on getting away with the perfect murder and wondered if he could pull it off again in the same building. He chose another Saturday night and saw a woman waiting to enter the elevator. He stood behind her, ensuring the guard was still distracted by his game on his phone. He pulled his hoodie tighter over his head as he noticed the camera. The doors opened, and the woman stepped inside. Just like before, she pressed 14, and he said he lived on the 13th floor as he pressed the button. But the woman didn't respond. She seemed strange, her head bowed, her hair covering most of her face. She wore a white dress and was barefoot, which he found odd, but her appearance didn't concern him. He kept a knife in his pocket, eager to use it. The 13th floor arrived, and he began to step out. He was ready to repeat what he'd done before, but as he turned back, he realized she was no longer in the elevator. Confusion crossed his face. He was certain she'd been there, but now the elevator was empty. He went in to check. The elevator door suddenly closed, and the overhead lights crunched and dimmed. He heard a hiss. The man felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up as a chill ran down his spine. The guy looked up, and his eyes widened. The woman was crawling on the ceiling, her hair growing long and slithering like a snake. Her eyes were bloodshot, and her smiling mouth revealed many sharp teeth. He noticed a blood stain on her sweater and realized she was Hannah, the woman he had murdered. Hannah's spirit reached out, grabbing his neck, savoring his terror. Then Hannah pulled him into her bloody mouth, her razor-sharp teeth waiting for him. His screams echoed within the metallic confines of the elevator, but no one heard. The killer became nothing more than a memory, consumed by the very spirit he had created. Nightmare in the dormitory. The room was pitch dark, with only a faint moonlight filtering through the curtains. Dahl woke up in a cold sweat, his heart pounding as if it was trying to escape his chest. Dahl gasped and sat up in bed, realizing that his roommate, Tyler, was standing over him, his face only a few centimeters away.
Dude, are you okay?
He asked, with a mix of worry and irritation. Dahl wiped the sweat from his forehead, embarrassed. It was only their first week in college, and he had already become the roommate with nightmares. As Dahl walked to class, he was still dazed from the night, the exhaustion dragging him down like lead weights. He panicked when he realized he was about to be late for class. It was only his second class, and he had hoped to sit near Lily, a sweet girl with beautiful, long hair who had caught his eye. Running to class, he deliberately chose a seat behind her and quickly found himself mesmerized. He was so distracted that he barely listened to the lecture. Just as he was thinking of how to start a conversation, his thoughts were interrupted when he was called on and reminded to pay attention. That night, he rushed back to his room, hoping his dreams would lead him to Lily, but the nightmare returned instead. He screamed again, and once more Tyler was annoyed.
You should really get control of yourself,
Tyler muttered. Dahl reassured him it was just another nightmare. The next night, Dahl sat on his bed, trying to focus on studying for an upcoming test. He worried that if he fell asleep, the nightmare would return and disturb his roommate again. But exhausted, he drifted off, and the nightmare came in one relentless wave. This time, Dahl felt paralyzed, a weight pressing down on his chest. Terror surged as he struggled to breathe, his vision obscured by wavy hair. He could feel that hair right in front of him. An overwhelming, intense feeling he had never known before emanated from a demonic presence. It appeared as if everything before him was real, desperate, screaming, unsure what to do. In his delirium, he summoned all his strength to claw at the demon's face. Instantly, he woke up, gasping for breath, and Tyler's face appeared hazily before him, shaking his head. Dahl glanced at his bed and saw his book still open. As he went to close it, he noticed an eerie coincidence. The book lay open on the page about Henry Fuseli's demon, the nightmare, and the image looked just like the creature he'd encountered in his dream. Determined to uncover the truth, Dahl grabbed his laptop and began researching. He stumbled upon a story about a demon that torments people in their sleep. He started connecting his experiences with this ancient legend, realizing it was eerily similar to his own. Suddenly, a knock on the door startled Dahl out of bed. He felt disoriented, unsure if he was still trapped in the nightmare. As he approached the door, it opened on its own. Lily stood there, her hair covering half her face. She stepped inside, moving slowly and unnaturally. A wave of fear washed over Dahl. That suffocating, disturbing feeling from his nightmares returned, tightening around his chest. Lily's expression was vacant, her behavior strange. Then, Dahl noticed something, a slow trickle of blood dripping from her face onto the floor. He asked if Lily was okay, but she didn't respond. She kept walking slowly toward him. She moved closer to Doll, lifting her hair to reveal a bloody scratch on her face, the exact mark he'd clawed onto the demon in his nightmare. He backed away, mind reeling, body shaking, and shouted, "This can't be real." Doll looked around the room, desperately searching for any sign of Tyler, hoping he would burst in and shake him awake. But he didn't appear. Doll was alone. This wasn't a dream. Everything looked just like in his dreams. Darkness was closing in on his vision. Before he could react, she lunged at him, pinning him to the ground. Her weight crushed Doll's chest, unbearable, and he heard a sickening crack as he felt one of his ribs breaking. Doll tried to scream, but no sound came out. Her icy breath brushed his face as she leaned down, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. The pain spread throughout his body, and his vision began to fade. His ribs snapped one by one under the crushing pressure, blood spilling from his mouth. The last thing he saw was her face contorting into a twisted, grotesque smile before everything faded to black. The uninvited guest. Ava and her fiancé, Jay, decided to host a dinner party to celebrate his mother's recovery. The house was bustling with final touches on the decorations, ensuring everything was ready. She had hired a server to assist her in serving their family and friends. The server arrived on time as scheduled. As soon as he walked in, Ava noticed an unpleasant odor coming from him, which made her uncomfortable, especially since he would be preparing food for her family, but she forced a polite smile. As the server unpacked his utensils, he kept glancing at Ava, asking for her opinion on spices, telling her to taste the food, and seeking her input on presentation. But she politely said she trusted his taste, as he was the chef after all. Soon it was 5:45 p.m. Guests were about to arrive, yet he was still there. After reminding him twice, she bluntly told him she needed him to finish everything and be out by 6 o'clock. He apologized, claiming her oven wasn't maintaining the right temperature, a problem Ava had never encountered before. As guests started arriving, the server finally began packing up his things. But instead of heading to the door, he suddenly walked toward Ava's bedroom. Ava, confused and worried, called after him and asked where he was going. He mumbled something about needing to change clothes. Feeling uncomfortable, she told him there was another bathroom outside, but he ignored her and went inside, locking the door. Ava found Jay and explained the strange behavior she had noticed from the server. Together, they went to the room and demanded he come out. When he appeared, he was wearing a t-shirt and jeans, but his expression darkened. "This isn't your house." Jay told him that he was Ava's fiancé and they lived there. The server went berserk, screaming about how Ava had seduced him, babbling nonsense that she couldn't understand. Then, he rushed into the kitchen, throwing food out of the fridge and onto the floor without hesitation. He screamed obscenities, his face twisted with rage. Jay had to call on his two brothers to forcibly remove the server. Fortunately, the party still proceeded as planned. Around 5 a.m., Ava woke with a start to the sound of a door creaking open. She nudged Jay awake, whispering that someone was inside the house. He tried to reassure her, saying maybe his brother had forgotten something like his wallet. But then, the noise grew louder, coming from outside. Jay told her he'd check it out while she should hide in the closet and call 911. Before she could dial, a familiar, disturbing voice echoed through the room. She stepped into the living room and saw the server, shirtless, his eyes wild with madness. He lunged at Ava, but Jay blocked him, holding him down while she called the police. Jay warned the server, "The police are on their way," but the server just smiled, "I need to make sure she's okay and unharmed." Jay stayed between them as Ava climbed out of the window. The server broke free from Jay's grip and ran into the kitchen. Just in time, when the police arrived, The server was in the kitchen, swinging a knife wildly. He ignored the police's orders to drop the weapon, forcing them to subdue him with a taser. The police searched the entire house, finding nothing unusual except one thing. Ava suddenly remembered that he had gone into her room. Upon checking, she realized some of her clothes and personal items were missing. Afterward, Ava and Jay cleaned the house, discarding everything the server had touched. They replaced all the kitchen items and made the house feel like home again. The server was sentenced to 3 years in prison, but the trauma and violation he caused still haunted Ava. She was grateful, though, that Jay had stood by her and protected her, helping her recover from the emotional ordeal. The girl in the red dress. The house we moved into after my father's death wasn't anything special, just another old, quiet mansion in the suburbs, far removed from our old life. It had been abandoned for a while, and it was clear why the rent was suspiciously cheap. Overgrown grass and neglected old furniture gave it a forgotten feel. But to my mother, it was home. I was 20 years old, and I dealt with my grief in my own way. Not long after we moved in, I began noticing small things slowly emerging in the house. But the sounds of whispers, creaking noises made me uneasy and anxious living there. It started with scratching, soft, persistent, on the other side of my bathroom door. At first, I ignored it, hoping it was just my imagination. But night after night, the sound continued. Then came the knocking, sometimes at the front door, sometimes at the window. It always came around midnight, but no one could possibly be there. We kept the gate locked, and no one could enter the yard. Yet the knocking continued. I told my mother. She dismissed it, saying, "It's just an old house." But I knew the house wasn't just old, it was holding on to something. One night, I invited my friend Joe to stay over. We were sitting in my room talking about school when we heard voices coming from the kitchen. It was well past midnight. Everyone should have been asleep. Out of curiosity, we pressed our ears against the door. A conversation was happening just outside, but we couldn't make out a single word. We tiptoed into the hallway, but the kitchen was empty, dark, cold. We checked the entire house, nothing. Everyone was asleep. The voices were gone, leaving only a chilling silence. A few weeks later, my brother decided to test his luck. He and his friends thought it would be fun to play with a Ouija board in my room while I was away. They thought it was just a silly, superstitious game. At first, nothing happened. They laughed awkwardly, asking questions but receiving no response. Then one of them froze. His face turned pale, his body stiff like a statue. Without a word, he bolted from the room, his friends close behind, terror in their eyes. Once outside, the guy finally spoke. He had seen her, a girl, standing at the bathroom door, wearing a red dress, her hand on the knob, staring at them. He said she couldn't have been older than 13, and her eyes were filled with something he couldn't describe. Fear, anger, curiosity. When my brother told me this, I thought he was just trying to scare me. Of course, I didn't believe him. Why would I? I had never seen her. But the story haunted me, lodged deep in my mind like a splinter I couldn't remove. Later, I had a birthday party at a friend's house. Jordan, a friend of mine, got drunk, so I took him to my room and told him to stay there until he sobered up. He collapsed onto the bed and fell asleep. Later, I went to check on him. The room was pitch black, with only a faint light coming from the bathroom. Jordan wasn't in bed. He was sitting at the bathroom door, one leg in, one leg out, talking to no one. I tapped his shoulder. He jumped, then looked at me, confused. He glanced back at the bathroom, then at me again. He mumbled, "I thought I was talking to you, but I just laughed it off, thinking he was too drunk." The next day, he explained, I was teasing him, but he was dead serious. In his drunken state, he had seen a girl in the bathroom. She was wearing a red dress, standing in the middle of the bathroom, asking why he was there. And when I walked in, she disappeared. It didn't stop there. The hauntings, the knocking, the voices continued. My fear grew as one by one. People close to me began talking about an entity that I had never seen in this house. I left my room and went to talk to my mother. While we were on vacation, my aunt and uncle stayed at the house. When we returned, they were sleeping on the living room floor, terror etched across their faces. They said the shower in my room kept turning on by itself, and the radio too, making it impossible for them to stay inside. My mother had no choice but to confront the landlady, who initially denied everything. But the truth came out. The landlady's mother had lived in this house as a teenager with her twin sister, who had ended her life in the bathroom wearing a red dress. It was all true. The red dress, the girl, the spirit trapped within the walls of our home. I didn't know how I was going to convince my mother to leave, but since we were struggling financially, it was piling up. So I had no choice but to stay in the house a little longer. Haunting scars. I used to live in a small house near a large town. Every morning I would read the newspaper as part of my routine. One day, an article caught my attention. A man from our town had been missing for almost 4 months. The article described a distinctive scar, a large one running from his left ear, across his mouth, to his right ear. The description felt eerily familiar, like something from a horror movie I'd seen before. A few months later, news broke that another man had been found murdered not far from our home. The police began investigating, but despite all efforts, they couldn't find any leads or evidence. The events made me anxious, but over time, I tried to push my fears aside and carry on with my normal life. A few weeks later, one night, I was getting ready for bed. I was the only one in the house with a bedroom on the ground floor. My habit was to leave the window open, as I often got too hot at night. Exhausted from the day, I quickly fell asleep. A loud noise suddenly woke me up. A sound like something had been thrown against the wall near the window. My bed was positioned right in front of the window, so the sound was especially loud and alarming. The black curtains blocked my view, leaving me in a dark cloud of anxiety. I uneasily strained to listen for any sound. Then, a chilling dripping sound caught my attention. It was coming from the window, dripping onto the floor. My heart raced as I fumbled for my phone to turn on the flashlight. The beam revealed a horrifying sight. Blood was dripping from the window onto the floor below. I hesitated for a moment, then pulled the curtains aside. The scene before my eyes was horrifying. A knife, covered in fresh blood, lay on the windowsill. Outside, shrouded in darkness, stood a figure. Although I couldn't see his face clearly, the scar was unmistakable. It was the man who had been missing for months. He stood there, staring at me with empty eyes. A shiver ran down my spine as I realized the man's scar was freshly cut, blood dripping down his face. He didn't move toward me. He just stood there, strangely still and expressionless. Panic surged through me. I rushed toward my father's room, my heart pounding so hard that I could barely hear anything else. The figure outside remained still, his gaze fixed on me. My mind raced. What was he waiting for? Why was he doing this? What did he intend? As I reached my father's door, I turned for one last look. The scarred man was still outside the window, his face a horrifying mask of pain and malice. I could see him through the gap in the curtain. He still hadn't moved. Finally, I entered my father's room and told him everything. The bloodstains were still visible on the windowsill, the knife gleaming ominously. My father, alarmed, immediately picked up the phone and dialed 911. They rushed to the window, but the man was already gone. The police searched around the house, their flashlights sweeping every corner, but they found no sign of the scarred man. They assured us that they would continue investigating, but their reassurances did little to calm the fear that surged inside me. The figure outside had vanished. The darkness was now still and silent, but the horror lingered. The scarred stranger had come so close, and his intentions remained shrouded in mystery. Mysterious invitation in the basement. The warm afternoon sun spread across the school campus as the students left for the day. I remember it like it was yesterday. Everything seemed normal, but there was something different about that week. That was the week Justin arrived. He was a new student, showing up in the middle of the semester without warning. He was quiet, maybe a little strange, but friendly enough. He sat next to me in class because there happened to be an empty seat, and soon enough, we started talking. Justin always seemed distant, like he was hiding something and rarely talked about himself. He just said he had recently moved to our town. There was something odd about him, but I brushed it aside. I thought everyone had their quirks. A few weeks later, he invited me over to his house. I was a bit surprised by this. He told me to come around 7 p.m. I wasn't particularly excited, but I agreed. After all, he was new to town, and I thought he could use a friend. That night, I took a bus to his neighborhood and started walking to find Justin's house. His home was in a rundown area. The houses were small, and the streets were eerily quiet. The porch light was off when I arrived, and the windows were dark. I texted Justin to let him know I was there. After a minute with no reply, I moved closer to the front door. It was unlocked. I paused for a moment, then pushed the door open. Inside, it was almost pitch black. The house was silent, except for a faint noise coming from somewhere deep inside. I stood at the entrance, calling out for Justin, but there was no answer. My phone buzzed, and finally, he responded, "Come in. I'm in the basement." I went down the basement stairs. The sound of a TV or video game echoed from the basement. The basement door was slightly ajar, and the noise grew louder as I approached. I figured Justin was playing something. The basement was darker than the rest of the house, with just a faint light flickering. As I descended, the sounds of gunfire and explosions became clearer, but something felt wrong. I called out to Justin again, but the only answer I got was the echo of my own voice. At the bottom of the stairs, I hesitated. It was pitch black, except for the flicker of a TV somewhere in the distance. I moved forward, inching through the darkness, toward the faint light. I called out again, louder this time, "Justin," but still nothing. Suddenly, I felt it, a hard shove from behind. I stumbled and hit the ground face first. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and I lay there for a moment, stunned. Laughter echoed through the basement. I staggered to my feet, my heart racing. I turned, trying to see who had pushed me, but the darkness swallowed everything. Then came another shove, harder this time, sending me sprawling to the floor again. The laughter started up once more. It felt like I was being toyed with. Panic hit me. My legs were trembling. Someone kicked my legs as I tried to stand, knocking me down again. I had to get out now. I sprinted toward the stairs, my feet slipping on the slick concrete floor. My heart pounded in my chest. Footsteps echoed behind me, and the laughter still rang in my ears. My hands fumbled in the dark, desperately searching for the railing. My foot caught on the bottom step, and I stumbled, but I managed to catch myself. I burst through the front door and ran. When I got home, I texted Justin, wanting to know what the hell had just happened, but he never responded. The next day at school, I expected him to show up and either laugh it off or offer an explanation. But Justin didn't say a word. He sat there, silent, avoiding my gaze. Then, one Monday, he was gone. His desk was empty, with no books or belongings. There were rumors that he had moved away, but no one seemed to care. But I did. I couldn't stop thinking about that night. In my mind, I kept replaying the moment I was shoved and the laughter that followed me. It felt like I was being hunted. I still wondered if it had been Justin or someone else down there with me. And then I remembered something I had overlooked in the chaos. When I first entered the basement, there were more footsteps than just mine. I didn't dare go back to Justin's house after that day. I'm glad I escaped that house. I know that some mysteries are better left unsolved and without knowing, but the questions I wonder still haunt me and push me to find them. I don't know if I should.